Rpj Industries, the small shop that produces big ideas. Rpj Industries utilizes 25 plus years of machining experience in agricultural, industrial, and high-performance markets. They offer multiple welding technologies, including MIG and TIG. They also offer lathe turning and custom CNC milling. They are capable of prototype, one-off, and short-run part production. Rpj is also Bobcat certified to more efficiently design and produce parts for their customers. Look into the Rpj Industries Facebook page to view some of their past projects, and be sure to consider Rpj for any of your future projects and let their experience work for you. Welcome to the premiere episode of Loud and Proud with Carl Downs, brought to you by the Beer Money Pulling Team and Rpj Industries. Today I'm going to talk with light superstock puller Andy Buhr and take a look at his tractor that he calls the Frankenstock. So thank you for joining us here as we get the Franken Nation story, and once again, welcome to Loud and Proud. All right, welcome to the premiere episode of Loud and Proud with Carl Downs. I'm here with Andy Buhr, Chief Bottle Washer, owner, and manager of Team Frankenstock here. So essentially we're debuting at Gordyville, the Midwest Winter Nationals here, 2017.
We're going to try to. If we get everything put back together and get all the parts that we ordered, I guess.
Yes, that's the key to it, getting the parts. Yes. So essentially, as the Gifford State Bank is sponsoring the Light Superclass Saturday afternoon here.
Correct. It's actually going to be the state level diesel light supers for a couple reasons, really. They had some issues with the fumes and stuff from some of the light supers, and part of the ceiling was falling down.
Yeah.
So they wanted to do something with the smoke tube, and Clint called me up and asked if he thought we'd be interested in doing something like that, and I thought, well, we'll give it a try.
Okay, that sounds good. And essentially, I mean, once again, tying into the way the Midwest Nationals essentially works, we're giving guys the opportunity that don't always get to pull indoors. We're putting everybody on the level playing field, with the
Correct.
diesel and everything like that. So
Yep.
It's good to have the diesel guys get their opportunity again. So
Correct.
So let us in on who is Andy Buhr as far as truck and tractor pulling goes.
Well, as far as tractor pulling goes, started when I was 7 years old. Drove our Minneapolis R at the Champaign County Fair in the barnyard class. Darius Harms was instrumental in getting that class started there, and it's been going on for almost 30 years. So actually probably over 30 years now. So I got my start there. Quickly moved into other tractors and this and that within the barnyard realm. Then when I was in college, we built a couple NA tractors and kind of played around with that. We had a Massey 1150 and then had a 2775 for a short time. Kind of learning the ropes as far as doing tires and this and that kind of stuff. And then met my wife at the National Farm Machinery Show, and her brother happened to be a light superstock puller, and that would be Mike Sandifer, and he got me talked into building a light super tractor. At that time, I was out of college and had a real job, so I could afford a few things anyway, and decided I wanted something different. We had a couple of those Masseys that we had pulled, and I thought, why not build 1155 with the V8 to pull in the light superclass? With that, we had a few challenges making weight and this and that, but we got it ironed out. It took about 5 years to build that tractor from start to finish. Never forget, I drove the setup tractor for Chrisman Farm Equipment in Chrisman, Illinois. bought it, drove it home. Well, drove it on the trailer, got it home, drove it in the shop, and proceeded to take it all apart so that it could never be a tractor again.
Absolutely, yeah. Because, well, it just turns out I was on the tail end of getting that together, and there were many challenges involved with what you ran across there. So, essentially, you started out, you were working on a genuine cast tractor.
Correct.
Components weren't quite on the horizon. There were some grumblings about components coming at a time. So you started out with a cast tractor, and you busted your knuckles and
correct. And that would have been probably, I bought the tractor in 2003. So that would have been the time I started building it. And at that time, there were very few component tractors in the tractor pulling period. So they were just starting to gain some speed. But for the most part, in the state level, there was no component tractors. They were mostly national tractors. And it hadn't filtered down yet. Well,
actually, a lot of state organizations didn't allow components at that time. That was still Grand National level tractor.
Right. And with ITPA is what I built the tractor for, the group. They didn't allow components at that time in light super. Now, in the midst of building the tractor, they had changed the rules to where I could have. But at the time, I was already committed, and we had some profab gears in the transmission and this and that. So we had spent some money on it, and we didn't want to give up on it without even trying it. So we went ahead and got it out there. The original plan, actually, on that tractor was to build a twin charger V8 on alcohol. And as fate would have it, we ended up building a 3-charger on diesel. So plans change, I guess. We ended up doing the diesel. I found a couple pieces and parts that I could use that I thought was going to be a lot easier to get started with. And I got to thank Batliners for helping me get started on some of that down there in Floyd Knobs, Indiana. They had some pieces and parts that I bought from them when they switched over to a 6-cylinder motor. And that basically got me a little jump start to get going. And it wasn't anything fancy. It was a 3000 series P pump from Columbus Diesel, a clutch and flywheel from Darren Rursch, and a couple other odds and ends that was just enough to get me over the edge to get me going and started. I think we even had a set of injectors we got from them. Boy, and I don't remember at that time even. I think they were like 522s or 524s.
Right.
Not real big in this day and age, but it was enough that it made smoke at the time, and we got going.
Right. So essentially, you were able to take your introductory tractor. You got that built for. I mean, it wasn't cheap, not because nothing is.
Nothing's cheap, but yeah.
But it was a lot of the homemade stuff that you fabricated yourself, and some things that we worked on. So essentially, we're where a lot of the guys are today, just getting started.
Right.
And really, where you're competing in ITPA, there's still a lot of cast iron tractors in that class.
Oh yeah.
So they're still competitive. Even though there are a few components starting to work their way into that state level pulling. So you got the Massey done, made a few passes down the track, and of course made the headers glow that would make Carlton Cope jealous. I'm telling you right now.
Yeah, they were.
We'll show some video here. We'll clip into that here. But Carlton Cope would be going, wow.
They tried to melt off the side many times. That tractor, I never understood it. You could try to put more water on it to put the fire out, and it wouldn't run. And we just ran it. I mean, it wasn't uncommon to be 1800. Or so on the EGTs, and that's just what it wanted to do, I guess. It didn't like it, but it did it.
Right, and essentially, I mean, it wasn't a totally maintenance-free tractor.
No, far from it.
There's always your common maintenance, gasket stuff and running your valve train and things to that effect. But, it was a pretty reliable tractor for you. So after the Massey, you graduated into the next step of the Massey.
Yeah. So basically at that point in time, I decided to do a new power plant. And there was a short term in there, and that's how we got the name Frankenstock, to where we ended up putting a Detroit Series 40 in front of the Massey rear end. That actually was only 1 year, and we only ran it, I think, 3 times maybe. And we actually ended up having crankshaft problems, go figure. But there was a short amount of time in there where it was a cast iron chassis with the G1000 sheet metal. Like I said, I think it was just 1 year. And I had an opportunity, had been shopping around looking for a different rear end. and I was going to go one of two ways. And that was I had a UB special rear end from our lean-to, I guess you could say.
For those of you who don't know, Andy and his dad Russell are avid Moline collectors, so there's a veritable plethora of Moline parts to choose from here. Donating to the stars such as Chuck Lewis, when Chuck was still running his cast iron alcohol motor on NTPA's Light Super Circuit.
Right, and that's actually what rear end he was using. So at that time, I thought, if I did a cast iron rear end, if I wanted to, I could pull Illinois, I could pull Illiana, or I could pull Illini State. It'd give me the most options that I wanted to do. Did some checking around on some things to see what we needed to do to the rear end to have it hold the horsepower. And amongst checking on things, I had found a phone number from Ace Chassis down there, Mike Stinson, and he had a deal that I couldn't pass up. What it amounted to was he had a customer that had a component tractor that was already built. I shouldn't say already built. It was the frame that was already built, and it had a fabricated rear end housing that was already welded up. And it was sitting there ready to go to get an engine put in it and all the assembly stuff put together in it. And the guy had some health issues and had to back out of it, and ended up getting it for less money than I could buy the fabricated rear end housing from him, which is a real reason why I called him, and ended up buying the whole tube frame from him and brought it home. Gosh, I'm trying to think. We went and got that thing because there was a pink elephant on the way.
There was literally a pink elephant on the way. We should have taken pictures, but
if we had smartphones, we probably would have.
Right. Yeah.
But yes, we didn't have that option yet. I don't think. I don't know.
But, so yeah, it was a good Saturday trip. Basically, came back with a lot of tubing and the rear.
Basically, came back with the rear end housing and some tubing and everything to put a component tractor together. Rolled it in the shed here. It sat for a little while because we had to spray some WD-40 on it to make sure it wasn't going to rust and this and that. And then proceeded to start building the motor plates and a few other odds and ends to get it put together. So really to make the component tractor work for myself, it worked out really well. That same winter, my brother-in-law Mike ended up putting the Mercedes Planetaries on his tractor.
Right.
And I got to buy the Franklin, magnesium Franklins that he had, which ironically are like an old set that I don't know if Banners made them or Joe Stock had them made or somebody. The only two that I know of I have on this tractor, and Bollinger's have on one of their mods. Okay. So they're kind of I wouldn't call them unicorns, but there are not very many of them left.
Right.
But it's the difference from the Engler ones to these is basically the back spacing that you have to use on your wheels, really the only difference. So we ended up using those Planetaries and axles. We went to Don Dean. He had a couple needled ring and pinions. Picked out the ratio. I don't remember where we were on ratio the first year, but I know we changed it. I want to say we were at...
I think we were at 433 when we started, and then we've bumped up to 410.
To 410s, I think, is what we got now. I don't know, there's a couple sets under the workbench here.
Yeah,
so.
And our notebook would tell us if we had it in front of us. But
Right.
We do a dynamite job of documentation here at Team Frankenstock.
At least we try to. Anyway.
Right. It has paid off for us on occasion. But, so essentially, it took... it wasn't quite 2 years.
It took another year to get the tractor put back together from the first time, just simply doing the motor plates. We did have to make some spacers for the rear end to put the spindles on. I'm trying to think if there's anything else real special. We ended up...
and then, we moving the sheet metal off of the cast tractor on a component chassis. Which those of you, if you go to Team Frankenstock on Facebook, it's a beautiful looking tractor when it's all together. There isn't a single piece of Moline sheet metal on it. That's all handmade by Andy himself.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, spoiler alert, right.
We're big Moline fans here, but unfortunately there's not one piece of yellow tractor on this yellow tractor. But you know what? It's still a yellow tractor in my mind, so that's all I care about.
And it's appropriately representative of the G1000 in my opinion. Now granted, we could probably throw it up against G1000 fixed over there in cold storage, and there are obviously differences.
Right.
But as you know, we've had a lot of people come up to us in the pits that say, "Wow, that's a nice looking G1000."
Right.
And even Justisons with their new G1000, they were appreciative of your handiwork. So. And if we'd used G1000 sheet metal, we probably would have been a heavy super.
Yeah, we wouldn't have made weight.
Yeah,
so we got we banged out all the aluminum sheet metal on it. There's always a few things. If I was to do it over again, I would do different.
Oh, absolutely.
But for the most part, it goes down the track, so it does what it needs to do.
Well, carpenters always say you got to build 3 houses before you actually get the one you want. So
Yep.
But so now you've gone up to the Ace chassis, still running the 40 series Detroit for
Correct.
power.
Yep.
Kind of give us a breakdown where you're at with the 40 series.
We've had some issues with that, and most of it comes down to the bottom end. The top end, we've been able to punish that and really haven't had any problems except for some injectors and some of that, which then caused bigger problems. But that's part of it. But we now have a counterbalance crankshaft. The flywheel's dowel pinned on, so it doesn't come loose near as easy. We've got an external oiling system on it from Rodney Schnitker. We've got the Oberg oil filter on it, so we can see all our cornflakes that go in there.
Right.
The Clevite cornflakes, as we like to call them. So this, what was it? The last winter had a block redone, line board, the new crank.
Which that's not a drop in. For those of you looking into doing the counterweighted crankshaft,
some guys counterweight crankshaft will drop in, some won't. The one we got was
not a direct drop.
No, it did not fall right in. We had to relieve the oil pan rail on the block to get it to fall in, and then actually had to do some grinding on the inside of the block. Just odds and ends, bolt holes and this and that. And if you can believe it, every block is made a little bit different.
Yeah.
So this one was different than the first one. So,
But again, here you are. You're a state level competitor. It's not as if you went somewhere, wrote the check, and you got a turnkey unit. I mean, out there, you guys watching, don't be afraid to take this stuff on yourself. I mean, we had about an extra 6 hours. Between the two of us in here grinding out those areas, picking up that crank, setting it back in.
That was probably the worst part, is picking up and setting it back in.
Right, because that's not a 10-pound crankshaft.
Right. We added almost, 70 pounds of counterweight.
70 pounds of counterweight in there. I know it's hard to believe, but that is what it takes. So, and it's a reputable crank. We got it through a guy. So
I know a guy.
Yeah, exactly. So,
but anyway, so the summer of 2015, we started to get pretty respectable as far as running and this and that. But we were putting at least one, if not two, main bearings in it every pass.
Right, and that's work.
Correct. We got it down pretty good to where we could come in here. I put an air conditioner in the shop so I wouldn't have to sweat so bad. And we ended up about 4 hours, give or take. We could take the oil pan off, throw the mains in it, put it all back together, and have it fired up. That was a lot of work to do it in 4 hours, but it could be done. And probably the worst run we had was at the state fair, and the main reason was because it was a 330 something foot pass. It was just more time on the run as opposed to some of the others. But
it started not liking it.
Yeah,
I mean, that's essentially, we were trying to defy the laws of physics. We were running essentially a stock crankshaft. The torsion on that stuff.
It turned out, we was flexing the crank that we thought we wouldn't be doing yet because we didn't think we was at the levels that should do that. So I guess live and learn on that.
And for those of you wondering, no, it wasn't the block because it was never the same main bearing twice.
Yep.
We used to take bets as to which one it was when we start pulling the pan off.
We had a game, and it was anybody's guess until the first cap came off, and then it was go from there.
So,
but the funny thing was it moved around from 2 to 4. And then every once in a while the thrust would get it just because all that trash went through the motor. But
So I mean, it was a guarantee that every time we came home, the next day it was like start draining oil, making this happen. So, didn't do. I mean, we were gaining on it. It was very respectable. We snuck up on them a couple of times, even though just a couple of issues there. So, So now we've basically gone through the long block where we're at. Got good components were in there. Still struggling with some of that as we're going back together. What have you done on the top end? What do you got for cylinder head up there?
We're still running. Actually, it's right here. Still running a cast iron cylinder head. Nothing real fancy there. Had Chuck work on it, massage it over for us. Basically, make it as good as he can make a cast iron head. And the commitment to go to a billet head. That's just a lot of dollars, and obviously you get more in return. But we've been fighting the bottom end so much. My thought is why try to make the top better when the bottom can't handle it. So really, until that's living, I mean, we're good. We've got all Inconel valves in it all the way around. We've got decent stuff in it, but it is still the stock head.
It's filled. I mean, Chuck
correct.
Filled it for you.
It's full of concrete, as we like to call it. Hard block, whatever you want to call it. But it's full because we actually, it was at the state fair, I think in 2013, I think. We blew the cylinder head off of it. It wasn't spectacular and ruined the sheet metal or anything, but it pushed it up far enough that it was cracked in two pieces. It was held together by a few little pieces of webbing here and there, and it was junk. So that was a do-over, and we started with another cylinder head and went again. But
But this has been reliable. I mean,
so far, yes.
Because as he mentioned, he has punished this. We run pretty tight on EGTs. We're not horrible about it, but as you can see up there, well, I don't know if you can get it in the camera shot.
We got a few decorations here that we've been hard on some pieces here and there.
Yeah.
Not proud of these, but it happens. So
right. Now that essentially. The first hook of the 2016 season brought some issues about.
Correct. So we went down to St. Peters, Missouri, made the trek. Almost didn't because the air conditioner on the truck was on the fritz.
It was hot.
It was hot that day. So we went down there and we had the tractor out, had it running, was ready for the season for the first pull, and we had messed with it outside here, and it had slipped time on us. Didn't think much of it. Went ahead and adjusted the timing back, put the little stop in there to keep it from slipping, put it all back together, fired it up, everything was fine. Went down to St. Peters. Nice little pull. First,
would recommend going there. They do have a nice setup down there, and it's a nice show for their town.
Yep.
It really is.
Yep. We didn't know how to get there, never been there before, and we pulled in and we had a new hauler this year. Didn't know how it was going to take corners and this and that, but drove it like a pro truck driver. And so we got down there, hooked it on the sled, and within the first 50, 60 feet, we went ahead and melted a piston. Got a piston and liner pretty bad, and then when it basically put a lot of pressure into the crankcase, blew the valve cover apart, blew oil on it, and we caught on fire like it has multiple times. Yeah. And so that wasn't cool. We thought at first just the valve cover blew out from like bad rings or something like that. So we messed with it. I forget where the next pull was going to be.
We were going to go to Wyoming.
Wyoming, there you go.
On July 2nd.
Yep. So then on July 1st, basically, we'd messed with it for 2 weeks trying to get something figured out. And basically, it did everything but pull the cylinder head off, and we couldn't get it to fire.
Yeah. It ate 3 cans of ether, and we wouldn't even get a lick.
Right.
So we really weren't sure what was going on.
So that night, we left here, about 1:30, something like that. Gave up on it. So the next morning, it was just bugging me, trying to figure out what we needed to do. I ended up unbolting the head, and lo and behold, we had a big hole in the piston, and the others weren't far behind. So I guess what we think happened is when it slipped time, it got hot enough, quick enough, that when I brought the injectors back to Shides, You're
welcome for the plug.
They had... I think 2 of the injectors, a $2 spring in the injector failed because of the heat and caused the whole motor to melt down. So that was a bad day.
Yeah. So, and for those of you essentially Andy was running a forged Aries piston with Type 3 hard coat anodized on it.
which essentially, those of you not familiar with the Type 3 anodize, it's like an M&M. It's like the soft chocolate in the middle with the hard candy shell. Type 3 anodize is used heavy in industry where, harsh chemicals and you're protecting the core on it. So it takes a lot to melt through that anodize, and he got it done. Yep,
in short order. Looks like you took a torch to it and just melted her through.
Absolutely.
And the liners look even worse. It almost burned a hole through that Darton liner.
Again, ductile iron.
Yep.
So another hard chore to do. So, But he did it with fashion.
Yep, that's right. Hey, at least we caught on fire.
Yeah, exactly. So essentially, it was fall back and regroup.
Yep.
Still, it was 6 weeks out to get another set of pistons because of the combination that you're running.
And that was at the best, and that was back to what we had. So that was making no changes to them. Mm-hmm. If we wanted to try to make it better, that was just simply taking what we had, and it was 6 to 8 week lead time. Well, that puts us into almost September,
right?
And
the season.
The season's over,
right?
So we made the choice. It turned out to be a bad one, I guess. But hey, live and learn. It was a choice. Yeah, it's either worse or worser.
Yeah.
So anyway,
my whole life's been fueled by bad decisions. So.
So we had a set of sleeves and pistons out of a 1680 combine we had overhauled years ago, and I figured, what the heck, we'll just machine the tops down, we'll cut them for valve reliefs, lower the compression all at the same time, we'll throw the liners in, we'll knock back timing, put more water on it, it'll be fine for the rest of the year. And in that 6 weeks, we got Carl got them all machined down for me. Looked like new. I mean, looked nice. Everything looked good. And put them in there, and we went over to Lincoln, Illinois, which ironically was the
where we started last year after
the block.
Trouble, right?
Yeah, I'll say after we cracked the block, we had a new block and everything put back together, and ended up going back to the same pole. First part of August, I believe, isn't it?
Yeah. Logan County Fair, once again, very nice fair.
Yep, very nice fair, and we look forward to going back next year, hopefully with better results than we've had. But so we got it back together, brought it down to Lincoln, and everything sounded good. Everything seemed fine.
Yeah.
Got the injectors fixed. Everything started up, ran good. Even with the timing knocked back, we knocked it back to, I think, 44 degrees.
Yeah.
We typically have been running 50, and that's mainly because when we went to the 6-cylinder, we upgraded to the Sigma pump versus the Bosch P-Series pump. So we've got a 17-millimeter Sigma pump in it now, as opposed to the 13-millimeter Bosch pump, which is a huge improvement in...
It's a lot.
A huge improvement in performance. But so we got everything going, and at about 110 foot, I could feel something was wrong. And by 150 foot, it was bad wrong. And it turned out that we ended up burning the piston again.
Pressurized the crankcase that
way. Caught on fire again.
Yep. So, and actually what we'd done too, what made this one so much cooler is that we'd always thought that this valve cover was kind of an issue and that was kind of a flaky thing. So we girdled the valve cover so it wouldn't expand and let oil leak nearly as bad. Well, that just made the oil go other places.
Yeah. With more force.
Yeah, so it was more of a fine mist instead of globbing over, which made for a better fireball.
Yeah.
So if you check out the Team Frankenstock Facebook page, you'll see there's some video and some photos that would,
Yeah, I got to laugh because my 5-year-old son did the video. Did a pretty good job.
Very nice job.
And my wife got a picture of it with the big ball of fire around it, and a really cool picture, just not real good circumstances.
Yeah. So,
but anyway, we got so what turned out happening is that obviously we found a limitation of a stock piston. When we pulled the oil pan off, it had like aluminum dust down in it where it had burnt or just broke apart in pieces.
Like spray weld would.
Yep. And it was almost stuck to the bottom of the oil pan is how much force was trying to push that stuff down. So I guess lessons learned, should have known better, but we didn't have much to lose, so except some time.
Yeah.
And
our time's not worth anything.
Yeah.
So it just made it easy.
Yep. So that's kind of where we ended up this year. At that point, we, pulled the plug, And old Frank's been sitting in the shop here ever since with the cylinder head sitting on the workbench and the bare block in it. We got everything basically cleaned back up, put back together, mic'd out the crank because we went ahead and I had the rods resized just because I was concerned because the one that got hot had the aluminum spray welded to the connecting rod even. And so I had the machine shop check those out, and those are done. I just got to go get them now. Kirk's always taking care of me on that stuff over at G&G and ran tool for that. And he's got them ready to go and go get them as soon as our pistons are ready to slide the thing back together. You know, with the bearings that we've been using, we've used standard bearings, we've used H bearings. I haven't tried a set of the King bearings yet. I don't know. Some guys love them. I haven't heard anything bad about them. They're a little salty, I guess, but so are the H bearings. So, I guess time will tell.
And, you know, we could just spend more money to beat them up, too.
Correct.
You know, I mean, it could be to that extent.
Correct.
So.
Yeah, that part we don't know yet. But I've had somewhat decent luck with the Clevites. They've taken a lot of abuse over the over the years, so we're going to go back with the H bearings on that and see what happens. But that's kind of where we've started, I guess, or where we've been the last couple of years, some of the headaches we've had. And like I said, we've documented it all pretty well on the Frankenstock Facebook page.
Right. If you want to see a lot of the cool parts that we've broken, there's a lot of good pictures of that on the Frankenstock Facebook page. But essentially, I mean, you are the typical state level team.
I would assume so anyway.
Yeah. You know, I mean, we've got a nice group of guys that we're pulling with right now in the state of Illinois. And, you know, they're a lot of those guys they're 40-plus hour a week guys. They also farm, you know, and, you know, we're not leaps and bounds ahead of them by any stretch. You know, we're very competitive with them at this point in time. You know, we do occasionally run across a few guys that drop in for gas money in the state of Illinois, and you know, it shows. You know, but you know, against some of those Grand National tractors, we're within 20 feet of them, and we don't feel bad about it. Because that extra 20 feet costs.
Yeah.
I mean, really costs. So.
Especially if you want to keep it on grease.
Right.
If you want to keep the diesel, you know, a couple years ago, Esden had his diesel light super out, and he proved it could be done. But man, it took a lot of work and took a lot of money.
So we'll backpedal a little bit. You had initially thought about alcohol. It just turned out you went to grease. You carried the grease over to the new tractor. So what drove that? Especially when you got the resource of your brother-in-law.
Yeah.
You know, Mike does fairly well with alcohol systems.
Yeah, and he digs me every chance he gets. Yeah. You know, I originally did diesel. When I started building my tractor, I was working for AGCO Corporation, traveled a lot, and made it over into Indiana quite a bit, over to their shop. And that's where the frame was built and all that. Well, when I got my other job at the bank, I was now home, and my tractor came home with me. Well, I didn't know a thing about how to tune an alcohol motor or any of that. That was going to happen through Mike or Chuck.
Right.
Well, those guys are now 2.5 hours away, and I knew how to tune on a diesel, so I thought, well, we'll just try it with diesel. Well, I kind of like the smoke, so we kept with diesel. You know, I found a deal on the Sigma pump. If it wasn't for that, I probably would have been on alcohol right now, just because I got a good deal on that pump. And it's been back to Columbus a couple times, but nothing's major gone wrong with it, and it's held up pretty well. So that's kind of the reason, I guess, I just didn't want to give up on the smoke. Just because it's nice to see a combination class in the regional or state level. There's still a few diesels floating around. Right. When it comes to Grand National, there's not one anymore. And it's people like seeing the two pull against each other. It takes a lot to do that, but that's one of the reasons why I've kept it on smoke. You know, would it be easier to go to alcohol? I don't know. It's the same parts, and it's just different problems, I guess.
Essentially, I would agree with that. I mean, everybody's so used to seeing the alcohol tractors right now, and honestly, there's been a lot of years of development behind it. You know, when Brian and Ernie started making the alcohol stuff really happen, you know, Chuck and Mike do a very good job with alcohol, and it just makes it look easy almost.
Right.
You know,
but it's still not easy.
No,
There's nothing about it easy.
No, because I mean, believe me, it's the horsepower that makes some of these things happen. Those guys are probably spinning what? Some of them are spending 3,000 more RPM than we are with the diesel tractor.
Close to it.
That brings its own set of trouble. I mean, those guys are having to be a lot more, how should I say, attention to detail.
Right.
Just to make that. I mean,
the valve train alone.
Exactly. So
because we're limited to push rods, we can't have an overhead cam.
Right.
So your valve train is one of your big issues when it comes to running high RPM, and that's one of the things they have problems with.
I mean, essentially, it's a 13-inch push rod that is in most of these combinations.
Right.
I mean, that's a pretty long spring or pogo stick essentially when we get down to it. So, I think we're probably going to see RPM limits.
Just because of that.
Just to have, unless you're going to start running an inch push rod.
Yeah, but you show me a commercially or agriculturally available block that you can make that fit.
Right, because I mean, even like our good pal Kent Payne is running like a 5/8 push rod in the Super Rooster, I think.
Yeah, it's a big one.
And that's about all the room he's got.
Right, and see, we've actually had issues with oil drain back because of the bigger push tubes we have in the block. Because that's where
a lot of changes actually to try to get the oil out of the top into the bottom.
I'll say we've got 2 more drains from the valve cover to the bottom of the block just to get oil back down there. Just because that's how the factory designed it, and that's one of the things that's you gotta look out for that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, which it's nice for the light superclass staying on the push rods to keep.
Correct.
That to a certain extent, that's a horsepower limiting factor. Now the guys are going to spend the money to get around it no matter what.
Oh yeah.
But it's kind of good there. So, so here we are. Essentially. The show premise is about state level tractor pullers. I talked with Jason Schultz there, beginning of 2016 when he started his show, and we kind of been kicking around, what to do and some more content for the Beer Money Pulling Team, the guys. So you and I have had a lot of conversations going back and forth between chains popping and and stuff like that on the road, and we've analyzed, because we've got ties to state level and national level competitors.
Right.
And as far as percentage goes, I mean, the state level guy really outnumbers that Grand National guy by a long shot.
And it always has.
Right. And then there's a reason for that. So, we're trying to bring light to what it takes to run a state level vehicle out there. And, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to say it's just as hard to run a state level tractor as it is a national level tractor. But, this does not come home and just go in the shed and then we load it up and go again.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of components that, let's face it. I mean, we probably got 10-year-old Grand National stuff in the tractor right now, or 15 or something to that effect. So, it all trickles down. And, there's a lot of good, hardworking guys out there on the state level. So, that kind of covers a lot of what we've been up to here the last couple of years. So,
as far as the tractor goes,
Andy and I have both been very involved in state level tractor pulling. We're both members of the Ileana Pullers Association board, trying to do what it took to promote guys, that were on different levels.
That's one thing I will say is that you always question why you're doing that, because it is a volunteer position.
Absolutely.
And then everybody wants to complain to you. But at the same time, I always thought that everybody should have to do something to that effect. I was president for, I think, 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those where it was a very valuable learning experience, just because you get to see the ins and the outs of tractor pulling that you don't normally see if you're only a competitor.
Literally the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Correct.
Really.
Correct. And there's some behind the scenes stuff you get to do you may not want to do, but it's always one of those where if you can learn from it, and it makes you appreciate some of the stuff that happens a lot. I'd hate to think how many countless hours are spent planning for a tractor pull.
Right.
Just today we spent probably 2.5 hours planning for one of the pulls that we're involved in, and that's over at Rantoul at the Half Century of Progress. We were talking about what classes we might want, what order, what day, what sled we might be able to get.
Yeah, who you do want there and who you don't want there.
Yeah, well, to be quite honest, as a promoter, there's been issues with some classes, so do you want to invite them back?
Absolutely. No,
And those are things that people kind of seem to forget. Just because you've been at a venue before doesn't mean they have to have you the next time. If you don't want to treat your promoters well, then they don't have to treat you well, kind of thing. So
yeah, absolutely. V. Arthur always said every tractor puller should have to put on his own tractor pull once.
At least once.
Yeah, just so you know what it takes to do it. So the next time you roll into one, you can truly appreciate who's doing what for you.
Correct.
So, and then serving on the board also. I mean, we had a lot of long discussions about rules, what limits should and shouldn't be in there. Listening to guys who think that they, knew what was best for their class, and we were fortunate. I'll be honest with you. In the Ileana Pullers, there's a lot of really good guys out there, a lot of good personalities. But sometimes you got to remember that sometimes tractor pullers are like your children. You have to protect them from themselves.
Right.
So
otherwise you'd end up with pro stock tractor rules in what should be a farm stock level class, because everybody wants more horsepower.
Exactly.
Nobody likes the limits because it costs money to get around the limits.
Well, but by the same token, yes, absolutely, I agree with that. But let's say this turbo restriction rule. Well, that made my turbocharger go from $900 to $5,000 over a 10-year period. That's correct. But had we not given you that limit, you would be like a pro stock tractor, or like this light super tractor here, where you're putting a bottom end in it every 3 passes. You're running the overhead, or even probably doing more overhead work than you ever imagined you were doing. So, yeah, you got to kind of keep all that stuff in perspective.
Correct. And it's one of those that, a perfect class to look at for one of the things that surprised me the most was the pro farm tractors. I don't know, when we started, or when I started, they were probably maybe 1,000 horsepower.
Maybe
800.
When you were on the board, you and I were on the board, Ileana Pullers Association Pro Farm rules was the 3-inch charger, low pressure water, and no intercoolers. Mm-hmm. Well, there were other organizations in the state of Illinois that had intercoolers, and we were starting to see that maybe there was some interest in trading tractors at events and this and that. So it got brought to vote on 1 year, and we allowed the intercoolers in. And holy cow! Yeah,
that ice box changed a lot, and it didn't happen overnight. It helped overnight, but what it did is it allowed guys. They then did some R&D with turbos, with their injection pump, and this and that. And what they found out was that if you could cool that air, it just kept getting more and more and more torque.
Correct.
And finally, there's some of the tractors that were in a pro farm level class, billet crankshaft, all girdled up on the bottom.
Well, essentially, percentage-wise, I'm not going to say the exact number, but percentage-wise, you had as many billet crankshafts in pro farm as you did in super farm.
Probably.
Percentage-wise. So, and essentially, the horsepower numbers stayed about the same as super farm. But because of the RPM that the pro farms were limited to, the torque numbers shot through the roof.
Right.
I mean, I remember we were at Rossville event. I was announcing their first NTPA event that they'd had there at the time. And they had a super farm puller up there just kind of, watching the show. Super farm had already just got finished up, and they were switching over to pro farm. And Mike and Mary were moving iron around in the sled. And the puller goes, "Oh, they're taking a brick out." And I said, "No, they're putting a brick in."
Yep.
No. Yes.
Yep.
I mean, essentially, the torque numbers that Pro Farm were making, there were a lot of guys. We had some guys in the area that were pulling Super Farm, and I would have paid the money. It's like, okay, I triple dog dare you to hook with our Pro Farm. Let's see how that works out.
Well, and the other thing too is they were 11,000, or were they 12,000 yet?
They were 12,000.
12,000 pounds. They were on 20.8 radial tires. Those things would flat hook to the track.
Absolutely. And that amount of torque, I mean, it just really,
those were years where I was on the track a lot, doing a lot of officiating and flagman, and those things would just keep asking for more. And I just never could believe that they could, you'd hear it start pulling down and then it wouldn't stop. It would just keep going, and that just floored me.
And the intercoolers kept getting bigger. The pumps, more water.
Yep.
I mean, it was an incredible it was beautiful to watch from the stands. I mean, really.
Right.
I mean, and we got to see that well, which now, Pro Farm is struggling because of that. Because essentially, I mean,
well, there's a lot of classes if you want to run the RPM class or this or that. There's a lot of other classes out there, which is one of the other things within state level pulling that has changed to where it used to be you had super stock and pro stock.
Exactly, at different weight levels. And that was it. I mean, when you and I were growing up, and well, I started being involved in the late '80s, mid '90s. That's what it was on the state levels. When you were an NTPA member state, you had multiple weights of pro stock and multiple weights of super stock. There was no other. If you wanted to pull a 20.8 tire with a single charger,
you were going to be brush pulling at that time.
Exactly. And it wasn't until the mid to late '90s when the farm stock class came along and
to Illinois.
Yeah,
yep.
Exactly. And
it went well. It went well for quite a few years because it was their entry level class.
Right. So, and that's how Pro Farm evolved. So it went from a 2 1/4 inducer on that little charger, TO4. It was a TO4 base is what the rule was. Yep. A 2 1/4 inducer restriction.
Now they're using HX82 base.
Yeah, and they weld a beer can in there to get their 3 inches. So,
yep.
And they're turning that at 3,000 RPM.
Right.
So I mean, that just goes to show how the technology had kind of come about. So, well. Appreciate the time there, Andy. Maybe we'll take a minute here. We'll take a look at some of these components in the Frankenstock here.
Not a problem. All right, well, here is the heart of the beast. Basically, it's our short block. The crank is in it. We've got some oil lines and some whatnot on it. The injection pump is on the side yet. We didn't have to take that apart from the last go around. But basically, this is what we got. Of course, up here we got our belt drive system to run our oil pumps and everything. They're all unhooked at this point in time. I got the water injection
now again,
drained out.
Those were items that you're able to find slightly used from other competitors.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't all brand
So
new.
this is a good story here. This Enderley fuel pump. I had an issue down at Mexico, Missouri with my Kramer pump, and I had run a Tuthill pump prior to having this Enderley on here, and we ran out of fuel pressure there. Very odd thing to happen. Well, it turns out the Tuthill took the fuel from the top, whereas the Enderley takes it from the bottom, and we ended up ruining that pump. And so competitor over at Rantoul, Kurt Kessler, had fuel system from his old alcohol tractor sitting around. And it just so happens that the mounting flange, the drive flange, and all that is the same from the Tuthill pump to this Enderley pump. And so we ended up putting this on here and haven't looked back. Ended up borrowing it from him, and now I'm borrowing it from Carl. So he ended up buying it for an alcohol setup, and we just never took it off. The good thing is with diesel fuel is that it's got a lot more lubricity than the alcohol would, and this thing will last forever doing what it's doing.
And that's why my tractor's not done, because part of my fuel system's on
Frankenstock. That's okay.
That is what's holding me back from
Perfect.
getting my tractor done. So.
Perfect. But we do end up running typically about 60 to 80 pounds of pressure into the injection pump, and at a good volume too. We've got 2 -8 lines going into it, a -12 feed line to the pump from the tank, basically trying to give it as much chance to get the fuel in there as possible. And then the fuel injection pump actually does have its own self-contained oiling system in it, so we do change that about every 3 runs. It hasn't been a problem this year just because we had 2 runs on it.
Right.
But that is a maintenance item that we do check on. We want to make sure that the oil is not diluted with diesel fuel. Those are usually indications that there's something going wrong within the pump. I'm trying to think of anything else.
You've got these 2 pieces of aluminum at the end of the block here.
Yep. So what these are inspired by Kent Payne, but we had to make ours for the Light Super Edition. He had steel pieces that he had made on his for a top girdle. It turns out on these blocks is that they can end up cracking about here, and it'll actually want to push the block apart with high enough boost levels. It's typically worse on the back than the front, but we decided to put a girdle on both the front and the back. And my trusty machinist named Carl ended up whittling these out for me, and we basically put a preload on the top of the block to help hold it together. And we haven't had any issues, so we're gonna stay with them on there, just because no issues are good issues.
That's correct. And essentially, this is you're running a non-deck plate motor.
Correct.
Now, if we were to ever graduate up to a deck plate motor, that would kind of make these a moot point.
Correct.
So,
at that point, we would have a piece of 5/8 steel on top of this deck surface, and that would eliminate this being a problem. If you know anything about weight, a big 5-inch or 5/8 piece of steel that's sitting on top of this would weigh quite a bit, and that's another thing that would not help us make weight.
Right.
And amongst doing other things that we've done, we now have an aluminum girdle. We used to run a steel girdle. When I switched to the counterweight crank, we had to try to save some weight, so we switched to aluminum girdle and saved, I think, all told, the girdle itself was like 30-something pounds less, and the crank, so we're still net 40 ahead, but it was better than being 70 instead of 30. So we ended up having to take one full weight off and putting some half weights. But in the change of all the rules and stuff that we've had in state level, we now get to be 100 pounds heavier than we were the year before. So we still get to have the same amount of weight that we had.
Still winning.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do we have over here on the firewall, Andy? You got this, your water injection valve, I'm assuming, right?
Yep, this would be the Simpson water valve. Max Simpson's famous for making these, almost like fried chicken.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that was our little game of Captain Obvious there. So
there you go.
We could point that out.
Yep.
So.
Right behind it here, these are the actual probes for the EGTs that we got. As you can tell here, our fire was pretty hard on all this. At one point in time, we had them all labeled and numbered, and everything was nice and easy to read. Fire's pretty hard on that kind of stuff. But we've got a total of 8 EGTs. We've got 1 in each cylinder that we monitor. We've got 1 in the oil pan that we monitor the oil temperature, and the other one we have in the intake manifold to see what temperature the air is going into the engine. Really not a huge importance for us, but we had it available, so we went ahead and put it in there. These
Better than having
sensors,
the wire just dangling down.
Exactly. These sensors here are for our computer. We've got fuel pressure, boost pressure. This would be high boost, low boost, exhaust pressure, and oil pressure. So we monitor those things with our computer, going for down the track for our runs, to make sure that everything's good to go. It does it in real time. We can go back to doing a little graph that we got, and it'll show all the lines and everything, and you got to decipher what it is, but it's a very invaluable tool when it comes to tuning on these tractors. We used to do it without it. Now that we have it, it's been a lifesaver.
Absolutely.
It's probably saved at least one motor, just catching things before they become a problem.
Yeah, and one motor's huge for us right now.
Yeah.
So.
Well, there's like 3 or 4 blocks sitting on the other side of the shed there that would show that that's what happens when you don't monitor things.
So essentially here, I got the clutch can in view now.
Yep.
So what are you running? You said Darren Rursch.
Yep. So Darren's got me set up. We've got a steel flywheel, and then we have a Crower Glide 5-disc clutch behind here, all hidden within the SFI clutch can. The starter actually pokes through there like it's supposed to. We run a starter for a big block Chevrolet. It has its challenges at times, but we've got it running on 18 volts.
Yeah.
And it seems to wing it over good enough that we haven't had any problems for a while. So I think we've got that somewhat ironed out. But the clutch, like I said, it is a 5-disc clutch. Those are one of the things that we actually do check that typically every run or every 2 runs. We actually pull the can off and run the feeler gauges in there to see where we're at. Talking with different people, everybody has a different idea what you want to run for air gap in your clutch. We've got it dialed down to a pretty good science at this point in time. We've had it long enough that I feel pretty confident with setting the clutch up when we're pretty well good to go from the get-go.
Now, what do you want running for a transmission in Frank here?
Well, it's kind of hidden underneath there, but right behind the clutch can, there's a drive shaft coupler and some shielding and everything underneath there. We have a Kipley 5-speed. Kipley was making stuff back back in probably the late 80s, early 90s. And this transmission actually came out of a modified tractor. Essentially, it's pieces and parts of an Eaton Fuller 9-speed put inside a magnesium case. So we do have 5 forward gears and 1 reverse gear. That's one of the things that if we needed to take the tractor on a diet, that would be one of the things that we could change pretty easily to lose a couple hundred pounds more than likely. However, again, that all comes at a cost. I got this transmission secondhand and got it bought right, and it works really well for what we want to do. The ultimate game plan was that we could run both light and heavy super, so that gave us a great spread in our gears to be able to run the light and heavy class. Now, with that said, the motor hasn't lasted long enough to be able to run any heavy classes, but that was the original idea upon putting this tractor together, was it was built heavy enough to be able to run the heavy class, but light enough to be able to run the light class.
All right, well, excellent. Running the typical 30.5s, I assume, right?
Yep, we got Firestone HP 10 plies. Chad Mayhill cut those for me. Got them on some whip station wheels. The main reason I went with the whip station wheels was because I have to have a bigger offset because of the planetaries, and they was available in, I think, 2 to 4 weeks. He could have them built, whereas some of the other builders were 12 weeks out. So that's why we went with the whip station wheels over some of the other competitor wheels. All
right, well, excellent. So, well, essentially, that's a nice introduction to the Frankenstock. Remember, folks, you can check him out at Frankenstock's Facebook page. And Andy, I appreciate your time here, and hopefully Gordyville is going to go well for us here this year.
Yeah, I hope so too.
So, all right, here we go. We're here at Loud and Proud signing off. Once again, don't forget to keep your eye out for the Beer Money Pulling Team, the Let's Grow Pulling Show on Monday night, 7 p.m. Central. And we'll be checking this out also on the Loud and Proud Facebook page in the future. All right, I hope you've enjoyed this look into the Franken Nation. If you'd like to continue following Andy and Team Frankenstock, be sure to check them out on Facebook at Team Frankenstock. Also, be sure to visit our friends Beer Money Pulling Team and Rpj Industries on Facebook as well. Hope you've enjoyed this premiere episode of Loud and Proud. And if you know of any state-level competitor that you think that we should know here at Loud and Proud, be sure to drop us a message at the Loud and Proud Facebook page, and we'll try to make that happen and have them a guest here on Loud and Proud.